Good morning, I'm Chris Ledeen. Thanks for joining us on CBS News Detroit. Right now, investigators in Clinton Township are getting ready to provide an update to that deadly explosion that happened in March at a vaping supply company. Let's go live to Clinton Township for the conference.
I never thought we would have it done this quickly. I kept saying we would because I wanted it done quickly. The community wanted it done quickly. Businesses wanted it done quickly. But we had to make sure everything was in order because we had a prosecuting attorney who wasn't going to take any information from us unless it was done the way it should be perfectly, so that when he presents his case, he's got everything he needs. I promised we would find what, how, and why this happened. Today, we're a couple steps closer. And with that, I'd like to start with Captain Tony Capella, who will talk a little bit about the police department's vision in solving this case and some of the people that were critical in helping our police department get to the point where they were confident to go to our prosecuting attorney, Mr. Lucido. Tony?
Thank you again, Mr. Kaner, for letting me address the community. Good morning, and thank you for joining us all here today. I'd like to go over with you a bit of what occurred on the night and weeks following the major event of Monday, March 4th, 2024. At 8:50 p.m., the Macomb County Dispatch Center, ComTech, became inundated with 911 calls reporting a fire and large explosions coming from 19500 15 Mile Road, a business named GU Select Distributors here in Clinton Township. Police and fire services responded quickly and began to secure the area in an attempt to keep the public away from a dangerous structure fire. As first responders on scene attempted to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding, all while the loud explosions remained continuous and pelting first responders with flying debris, tragedy ensued. At 9:31 p.m., officers reported a person injured near Beaconsfield and 15 Mile Road, about a quarter of a mile away from the fire scene. Though our officers were already in the area and arrived to render aid very quickly, we would later learn that 19-year-old victim Turner Lee Salter of Clinton Township would succumb to his injuries. It took multiple fire departments 24 hours to gain some control over the fire. Our partners at the Clinton Township Fire Department would spend well over a week monitoring and extinguishing these sporadic explosions, pop-up fires, and continual smoke at the scene. This was like nothing any of us had ever seen and hoped to never encounter again. The magnitude of this investigation was also like none other. The investigation is one which is still ongoing to this very day. It is our honor and opportunity to recognize and thank all those that assisted in this investigation and all agencies that extended their support the night of the incident. And they are the men and women of the Clinton Township Police Department, our partners at the Clinton Township Fire Department, the Clinton Township Department of Public Works, the Macomb County Road Commission, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, our surrounding agency first responders, which include many others, but to just list a few, the Michigan State Police, the Macomb County Sheriff's Office, deputies and dispatchers alike. Additionally, we're thankful for the support from the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office, the Environmental Protection Agency, the United States Customs and Border Patrol, and the New York Port Authority. And now for some additional details, I'd like to introduce the Clinton Township Police Department's Police Chief, Dina Caringi.
Thank you, Captain Coppola. Good morning. Clinton Township Police detectives submitted and served over a dozen search warrants in this investigation. They've conducted numerous interviews and reviewed hours of video in the past 6 weeks. Several meetings have been held with the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office and assisting agencies, with the most recent meeting being held on Wednesday, April 17th, in determining potential charges in this investigation. Our detectives had maintained open lines of communication with the victim's family and have updated them on the progress of the investigation. This past Saturday, April 20th, detectives received information that Nora Costello, the owner of Select Distributors and person of interest in this investigation, had a one-way ticket to Hong Kong, which was to depart from the JFK International Airport later that same evening. Detectives immediately met with the Macomb County prosecutors, in which a decision was made due to the evidence presented to authorize an arrest warrant for one count of involuntary manslaughter for Mr. Costello. which is a felony that carries a punishment of up to 15 years. Once that warrant had been authorized, detectives contacted authorities in New York, and within hours, the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, along with the New York Port Authority, advised that Mr. Castell was located and taken into custody without incident at the airport. Detectives from Clinton Township Police flew to New York, and on Wednesday, April 24th, took Mr. Castell into their custody and transported him back to Clinton Township. He had waived his extradition hearing and was arraigned yesterday at the 41B District Court on one count of involuntary manslaughter. Now, over the last several weeks, I've received numerous calls and emails regarding this investigation. People wanted answers, and for someone to be held accountable for this incident and tragic loss of life that traumatized a family and community. As we all know, good investigations take time. The detectives and assisting agencies involved in this investigations are to be commended for their work ethic, their integrity, their patience, and diligent manner in which they prioritize this investigation, all while managing other cases and outside pressures. I cannot say enough about the men and women of this department and, quite frankly, this profession. Day in and day out, they continue to protect the public to the best of their abilities, and their response and follow-up investigation surrounding this incident is a prime example of those efforts. Thank you very much, Mr. Cannon.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Clinton Township Board of Trustees, almost all of who are here today, for their support to the police department, to the community, and for the ongoing investigation. It seemed like a long time, but as I mentioned when I started, we want this to be done right, and we want it to be done complete. We don't want this just to be a one-time incident here in Clinton Township. We want to stop it from happening anywhere else. If we had this happen here, think about other communities that have a similar situation with businesses doing similar types of things. So I'm hoping when it's all said and done, not only are the people who did this to us punished, but those who might be doing something to someone else are caught before they get to this point. And with that, I'd like to go with our fire chief, Tim Duncan. Tim is going to be retiring soon. Nothing to do with this incident. He told us a long time ago. Tim?
Thank you, Mr. So anyways, we're obviously here today mainly for the police side of the investigation, and then what Prosecutor Lucido will talk about too. So just wanted to give a brief update on the fire side of what's going on. On April 19th, the Friday of that week, we released the scene back to the company. And then on April 22nd, they had approximately 30 private insurance fire investigators on the scene. They flew their drone over the site, and they were encouraged to walk the perimeter of that site. They still have not made entry onto the site for any of their investigations. So as you can understand, with that level of people that are involved in investigating this thing, it's still going to take some time. So after that, they had the interviews that were done. As you can understand, the ATF is the lead investigator from the fire side. They also had the Michigan State Police involved, the Clinton Township Police Department, and our Clinton Township fire investigators. The investigators, all of them, have spent hours and hours and been tireless in their efforts to try to figure out what's going on at this site. At this point in time, with the investigations and what they've seen, and as you see from the picture here, that ball of fire, the intensity of this fire essentially damaged a lot of what they would normally look to try to conclude what was going to happen on this scene. At this stage, they're still at the undetermined aspect of it, but they cannot exclude human involvement in this fire at this time. They would still like to have more investigation, more information come from some of the witnesses. Some of that is still coming out. Our hope is that in the future, when they actually get on the site and start pulling everything away, we're trying to maintain that southwest corner of the building, which is where we believe the fire started based upon the information we've seen, video that was obtained from the nearby businesses, and all the other information that we're seeing at this point. There is hope that there could be some information that was provided within the building. They did have some camera systems in there. We don't know how solvent they're going to be as far as trying to glean any information from that, but we are hopeful that something could be coming forth in the future on that. So obviously our investigation does remain open with the effect that we might still gain information that could lead us to a possible cause of this. The EPA, as will probably be stated, is working their efforts to try to get this site cleaned up. quicker than would be normally done. Anybody who's ever been out in the community that's had a fire, whether it's a residential house fire or something else, you've seen some of these sites sit for a year, sometimes 2 years. The EPA has taken a stance that they are not going to allow that to happen. So rest assured, they're trying to work as hard and diligently as they can with the company's attorney, with the people involved to get this site cleaned up. So we're hopeful that that's going to happen, but just imagine the scope and magnitude of trying to get these types of materials off of that site. There was over 3,100 canisters of nitrous found simply by the EPA alone that are sitting in secure containers at that site right now. You can only take those on certain highways across this country and certain places, so it's going to be very detail-oriented in trying to get that taken care of. So at this point, that's the update on the fire side of things, and I'll turn it back to Supervisor Cannon.
Thank you, Chief. I think all of us are very anxious to have a safe and complete mitigation of all the hazards that have scarred our community. So I'm happy to hear everything I've heard thus far. We know that we've got a tough prosecutor. He's got a tough job. We've given him what he wanted, and now he's got the ball in his court. So with that, Prosecutor Lucido.
Thank you, Supervisor Cannon, and everyone else that opined on this particular incident. I think as Chief Cringy indicated, the charge in the case is the highest charge that we could bring at this time based on the information, the evidence presented, as well as all of these agencies that collaborated together. We would not charge unless we knew that we had this case. There is just way, way too many agencies that had to do with the investigation, which is still ongoing. So at this time, the charge of involuntary manslaughter, a 15-year felony, was the highest charge that could be levied. Even though the gravity and the magnitude of what you see in the photo, as well as the amount of destruction that happened in this case, at this time, this is the charge. There was a bond set yesterday as he was arraigned. It was $500,000. It was cash only, no surety. In addition, there was a tether upon his release. He's supposed to surrender his passport if released, no weapons. He's not allowed to contain those or have those in his possession, and he cannot leave the state. Those bond conditions were based on the magistrate here in the court and the recitation of facts delivered at the time of the bond argument. I could only tell you this. We all have our hearts opened and concerned for the family that lost a loved one. There was no excuse. Absolutely none. And anyone that is going to be charged in this case, because there may be ongoing charges based on evidence that's submitted, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law as to the damage, as to also the death of this individual. We all feel the need at this time to be not only sympathetic, but also mindful of this event and never to happen again. Our office is very thankful for the agencies that cooperated and, more importantly, were open and dialogued with my office, and the fact that we could come to this charge so early, as the supervisor has indicated. That being said, I can tell you this. We will always strive to ensure justice. One is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But in light of the findings that we have seen thus far, this was the highest charge that could be brought. I'll turn it back over to Supervisor Cannon.
We will now take questions. If you can address to whoever you want, Rod, but just we want to repeat the question because we're filming everything and we want you to be able to go back later and get the question on.
All right, well, this could be for the prosecutor or the chief. I'm curious about the fact that he was at the airport. As I understand it was a one-way ticket going to Hong Kong. Can we talk about the sort of lead up to that, how he was found, what we think he might have been doing, and how it is that there's only one charge in this case? I know that you wanted to bring a charge to have a high charge, but there are no other charges, and it would seem that there's a lot going on here that might have led to more charges.
So the question is, what was the guy doing in New York, basically? Dita, did you want to take that?
Okay. Based on the fact that he was a suspect from the beginning, being the owner of this business. Anyone that owns a business and something like this happens has to be considered a suspect. As a result, it was plugged in that we got an alert, and that would be the police department, that he was exiting the country. The passage is through New York, from Detroit to New York and from New York to Hong Kong. And this has only been given to us as a result of the passport and the information that was provided to us in New York, such that a warrant issued. And it wasn't just that we didn't do an extenuating amount of discovery and information and collaboration. We've had multiple meetings, as the chief of police has indicated here, to come to that conclusion, Rod, to bring that warrant in a timely manner. We don't know what his ultimate goal was. Was it to stay out of the country with a wife and a child here? But we do know that he's in custody. And I think maybe he made bond last night. They might as well get it out there. And if he did, he has every right to be presumed innocent still until he has his day in court.
Is there a concern that he's a flight risk?
The question is it a concern to be a flight risk?
Great question. Nobody has a crystal ball to determine who is a flight risk, but his passport has been secured in New York, as well as he's got a tether on his leg. According to the bond conditions, he has a right to bond based on the facts, the circumstances, and his past criminal history.
So remand was not an option?
It's always an option. It's up to the ultimate magistrate in the case whether or not they felt, based on the totality of the circumstances, because bond is to ensure coming back to court. He's already retained an attorney, and he has every right, based on the circumstances, to make an argument for bond.
Do you anticipate more charges will come?
It all depends on what supplements that are submitted to the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office. Then at that time we would review that information and determine whether or not appropriate charges can be delivered.
But just so I'm clear, so he tried to use his passport in New York. That triggered an alert to police, which then triggered your issuance of the warrant.
It wasn't just the triggering.
Okay.
It was the multiple weeks that added up and the multiple information that was submitted and the multiple times we had met with the individuals that assessed this case.
But you didn't have a warrant prior to trying to use the passport?
Did not.
Would you have charged him if he hadn't tried to flee the country?
Absolutely.
Do we know where he was? In other words, initially we were told he was cooperative, and then he goes to fly to New York. Has he been in town? Do we know? Have there been other interviews with him prior to that?
Yes.
Yes, he has been cooperative. His attorney has been in contact with our detectives consistently, as far as I know.
Did he use his passport to fly to New York?
You wouldn't need a passport
I
for
know
New
you
York.
don't need to, but...
But it's leaving the country, that's when they would go ahead and look at the passport.
And who flagged his name? In other words, clearly you were concerned. I mean, how did that process work?
That was just through our partners in this whole investigation, just looking at every angle and making sure that everything was covered.
Is there any discussion, or has there been discussion with him about the way this was accomplished, and the fact that there's next to no regulation around what it was that he did? And is there concern that there are other places like this out there that we don't know about?
Rod always asks all the questions, not just some. So we appreciate the fact that you want to get to the bottom of it, but the reality is, what caused this fire, the source, origin, and everything, it's a culmination of the different agencies from ATF to our fire locally and everywhere else. At this time, we can't determine source and origin, but we do know we have a destructive site that was ground zero, it looks like, based on what you see here. So, that being said, Rod, as far as moving forward, if there's more information that's going to be gleaned as a result of the investigation, then we will step forward. Can't answer that.
Was this guy the sole owner of the business?
Based on the documents that were received, yes.
Okay. Has there been any investigation or looking at the other businesses that he owns in the area?
Yes, There has been a follow-up and investigation on those.
Was there anything worrisome in terms of improper storage of materials?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Was he alone in New York?
At this time, we would leave that in as part of the investigation. It's ongoing.
Is there any reason why his, you said wife and children, I don't know if one or two, I don't know yet, that they have to stay, or can they leave the country?
They have no bounds of the law on them at this time. They are free citizens of this country and the state.
Is there an extradition treaty with Hong Kong, or
Ron, I'd have to get my treaty book out from law school. I've got to be honest with you, it's a blessing that we have them in custody at this time, that, you know, that we have them under certain conditions of the court, and as a result, the quick reflex of the Clinton Township Police Department that did everything in a timely manner to do what we needed to do.
Early on, it was communicated that the business owner was cooperative in the investigation. At what point did that turn? Or did it turn?
It did not turn, as
Okay.
far as I'm concerned. He remained cooperative through his attorney.
Early on, there was talk about it's been 2 years since the building was inspected. Has there been any discussion about changing how often buildings get inspected for things?
That's what I was mentioning before. I'd like to see some laws changed, and it has to come from Lansing, that allows our building department and our fire department to go into the back room of businesses they might suspect are doing something like this. Right now, after they did their initial inspection, we're not allowed to go in the back room. And that's not a good law. Some people would say it's good to keep government out of your back room, but not in this kind of a case.
Yeah, I didn't realize. So, building inspections is a state regulated thing?
Barry Miller from our building department. Barry?
Yeah, the building inspections are controlled through the state, through our office in Clinton Township, but regulated by state codes. And ordinances could change for licensing requirements. Those are things that the township will look into after, and obviously bounce those off of our attorney to see how legal they are. Obviously, there's Fourth Amendment issues that we would have to think about when writing those ordinances, which will involve our attorneys to come up with the right ordinance to monitor types of storage and things like that. But the fire code does cover those. It's just about how you can get in those buildings legally.
And from the time you inspected it until this, there was no indication or anything that would trigger a re-inspection?
The building department had no complaints. We had no reason to believe there was anything.
No, from a fire site aspect, we actually have been scouring through our files about this business, and there was one opportunity to go into the building shortly after we did the initial inspection. They had an issue with a fire suppression system in there, and at that point they did not have these materials in their building. From a fire department aspect of what's going on with this type of materials, we are taking a very aggressive stance in the community, and obviously our inspectors meet with other inspectors throughout the county. This has become a hot topic item. We are visiting the gas stations, the vape shops, places of this nature that might house these types of materials, the gases. And what we're finding is a lot of them are really not aware that, number one, they shouldn't have it, and number two, how much they should have. So we have a limit that is being disclosed to them. Our inspectors and fire marshal are going out to these facilities and asking for them to voluntarily allow them in. And the majority of them will allow that. And several of them, when we have found out that their quantities exceeded what we consider allowable, we had them remove them. And they've been very cooperative. I think it's just basically shedding a light on the damage that something like this can do to the community. So we're getting good cooperation on that, and we're going to continue. But as you know, any department throughout the state just simply does not have the personnel available to get after these sites. Every year, you've got target buildings throughout, whether they're churches or hospitals or schools, so on and so forth. So it takes a lot of effort to get out in front of this, but we're going to do the best that we can to make sure that this doesn't happen again in this community or throughout.
While you're up there, because I don't know who this should be directed to, what was illegal in that building? Was it the quantity? Was it the product?
pretty much the product and the quantity. They shouldn't have had this in there, period.
At all.
It wasn't allowed in that district. They should not have had this in there. Rest assured, as you guys were asking earlier, there's entities reviewing this outside of the Clinton Township Police Department. You have the EPA involved. You have the ATF involved. They will find out how this got there, why it's there, where it came from. So there is obviously a lot more going into this from the federal side also. So this could be ongoing for quite some time to come. But believe me, as you see with the Clinton Township Police Department and the efforts that they put out in their professionalism, that's happening all throughout with the federal side also. So there's definitely going to be more to come on from their side of things. So I would definitely have you direct their questions to those people. So.
Could I ask Chief Karinji another question?
Of course.
I'm still curious about the fact that it took the flagging of his passport in New York to come to a charge. Was there the possibility of a charge prior to that? Were you thinking of charging him? How did that process go?
That was discussed on the Wednesday prior. It was the 17th. Detectives and prosecutors got together here and discussed the evidence and what they had up until that point. And the charge of involuntary manslaughter was discussed amongst other charges. And yes, when they got alerted on Saturday night regarding this, there was always a concern of extradition. Is he fleeing? We didn't have those answers, and that was why the quick response of detectives to the prosecutors. They met here that night, and within a short amount of time between the prosecutor authorizing the charges, getting it over to the judge to get it authorized, and entering into the system. Yeah, so that was already been discussed, and so it was put into motion that night.
Was Mr. Kestu aware that you were discussing charging him, and might that have been the reason why he was looking to flee?
I don't believe he was aware, no.
Did you feel you had evidence on Wednesday to charge involuntary manslaughter?
I believe so.
Is there a reason that a charging decision wasn't made that day, and it was made the
I think what you have to realize was there was a discussion had about potential other charges. And the research had to go into it because this is a unique situation. As a result, there was a alternative charge that could have been brought. And after doing a thorough investigation and review based on the facts, circumstances, as well as evidence presented, it was at that time, real quickly and in close in time, that we had come to the decision to make the involuntary manslaughter. Those elements of the crime were present, and we believe wholeheartedly that was the appropriate charge, and we have to do justice, and that means bring the appropriate charge.
Is the improper storage or illegal storage a chargeable offense, or is it just a fine? And
so, we'll go back to our building department for that answer.
Typically, the way this works is if we were to receive a complaint that somebody had illegally stored products on their premises, we would issue them a notice to remove immediately. We have done that with other businesses since then. We've had full cooperation with those businesses and saw no reason to shut them down. But essentially, our goal in the Clinton Township Building Department, Fire Department, is not to prosecute people, it's to bring compliance to the buildings and to the residents. If they comply, it's not an issue. If they did not comply, we would get appropriate warrants and shut the businesses down immediately. But that was never the case with this particular address.
But does it become a possible criminal charge?
Every violation in Clinton Township issued through the building department is a misdemeanor.
Okay, that's right.
Just for clarification, what were the alternative charges you had considered besides the involuntary?
Based on this ongoing investigation, we are not privileged at this time to make those. And the reason why is because if we find certain evidence that may lead to, then we have that option also to bring that charge. So at this point, because of the open evidence, we can't comment on it.
Sir, in the back.
Yeah,
may already be out there. Is there anyone that can comment on what, if anything else, at the site, other than the nitrous, led to or added to the intensity of
The question is, were there any other materials that could have helped this problem along?
So certainly, number one was the butane, the amount of butane that was at that site. That was the flammable. The nitrous is an oxidizer, so you put those two together and they're dispersing, and you have just an immense fire load. Plus the materials that were in the building. It wasn't just simply those gases. There was items such as bedding, different clothing, different materials that increase the fire load and the hazards. You had the knives that you've seen probably on the news flying through the air in the canisters, so on and so forth. So just simply the gas load alone is essentially what caused this. So imagine thousands and thousands of these things that were involved. And there's still, canisters on site proper that they're going to have to be concerned about as they enter into the site. So,
what, if anything else, on that site was illegal? Or
I think that's still going to be determined.
So that's still part of the ongoing investigation?
Yes.
There could be other chemicals or whatever that was?
We're not anticipating any more than that from what we've seen due to the ATF, our people, the Clinton Township Police Department, and the Michigan State Police having been on site for our part of the investigation. But until you start pulling all that heavy metal out and all the other debris that's covering up the stuff 4 or 5 feet down below, you just really don't know what's on there at this stage.
Chief, can you say how many businesses have been inspected and have had to alter their storage of whatever it is that they had?
So it's still ongoing. We've had, initially there was 2 that we got into right out of the gate that first week. One had what we consider a considerable amount. I can't go into the details of how much, but they complied, got that out of there quickly. And then the rest of them are usually the smaller scale, but we certainly need to educate them and bring them into compliance. But this is certainly, like Supervisor Cannon said, something that we believe the state needs to address. They did address it minimally when they started talking about the whippets right after this happened. Obviously, that was something that was taking place prior to this happening in our community. But certainly, we need that assistance. We need the ability to go in there and basically say, if you're not letting us in, guess what? We're coming in. So that will help our stance a lot.
The one business that you said had too much stuff in it, was it a party store? Was it something else? And how much did they have?
I can't get it to the level of how much they had, but it was essentially a oil change facility that was storing these things. So what people are finding out is the community at large has a large desire for this item, and they can make a lot of money off of selling these things. So we're trying to get out there and make sure that people are using it in an appropriate fashion. It's, the nitrous is supposed to be used for the food service end of the industry, and obviously we're seeing that that's just simply not happening. So that's where we would look for the assistance from the state to help us.
Just to be clear, you're saying it's the nitrous that's the issue for this kind of problem, but the butane, are you seeing that that's out there as well?
Haven't seen as much of the butane out there. Obviously, the materials are out there because simply he would not have been storing these if he wasn't selling them to other entities. So this is where I would advise basically our county and the state at large to get out in front of this and address this problem, because it's not just simply in Clinton Township, it's throughout the state. With the quantities that he had in this building, he's sending them somewhere. Now it's the time to uncover where are they going. So they're tracking that. Obviously somebody has to deliver it by truck, and believe me, with the ATF, the EPA, the police department, they're going to uncover where this stuff is going and where it was coming from.
I suppose he's willingly given you, Mr. Prosecutor, his client list.
It's always hopeful, but not necessarily going to be counting on it. I do believe that the chief had made a very soluble statement. It's the eyes and the ears of the community that report this that brings about the change, as well as the lawmakers in Lansing, to put it on the books so that they have the tools necessary to vet these things out. it would have been very helpful had somebody come forward and said, hey, look, there's a tremendous amount of flammable gas on the property. That would have worked really well, but in this case, the tools aren't there.
Mr. Cannon, question, we've been talking about the fire. What about our residents and the businesses that were affected? What is the township and the government doing to help them at this time?
I believe we're having their insurance companies be the first ones they talk to. And there are other businesses that are affected. And as our fire chief told you the other day, there were 20 or 30 investigators representing insurance companies, just that end of it with the drone overhead.
Because I'm sure many businesses and homeowners have insufficient insurance to repair their homes or their businesses, and they're the ones that are going to be at loss.
I hope not. You may be right. I don't know.
Part of the investigators, the 30 investigators that were on scene, were some representatives from the nearby businesses. So they are certainly part of this process, and they're going to make their claim to support their business.
Sir, you had a question?
Yeah. You know, residents, businesses have been very vocal on social media, get answers. How much pressure, stressful has this process of getting to the bottom of this been for the city?
I think for anybody that was involved in the whole process, we were very anxious to get to the point we're at today, and did everything we could to even speed it up, but to do it properly. This man would not accept anything from our police chief or our fire chief or anyone else that wasn't documented so that he could go ahead and take care of his business. And the other thing I would mention, we don't mention it enough, is there are still people who are trying to get some of these objects away from this site. There are some very dangerous things there. We don't know what's there. We know some very sharp objects. All these containers that blew up, they have ridges on them, and they're sharp, and they could hurt people. Please don't come to this site and look for a souvenir.
Gino, thanks for the question. Public pressure doesn't mean that we're supposed to go ahead and levy charges or ask the officers to bring it so that we can give them closure. What we're concerned with most importantly is fundamental fairness. And the fact that you just don't willy-nilly, this is something that is not normally, consistently, or ever done that I've been here in Clinton Township. And as a result, as the supervisor has indicated to all of you, this was very deliberate, this was very concerning to the citizens, like was asked, and they had to get answers, but we've got to give them in a timely manner after we can solidify the evidence to get to where we are. This is a huge case as it relates to all of the partners that were involved. And I thank the leadership and role that Clinton Township played, the entire force, from fire to police to zoning and ordinance, because it all is part of a case when brought to the prosecutor's office.
A couple of legal questions, because I don't want to know. The fact that he was trying to leave, but he hadn't been charged yet, is it illegal to try and leave?
Not at all.
So,
unless somebody is under charges, they have every right for freedom. And as a result, once the charge is levied, it is our duty and responsibility as law enforcement to bring him into custody.
And does anybody know if the family of Mr. Salter has filed, and does that have to, if there's a civil case, does that come after a criminal charge?
Civil cases can come at any time. We are, basically, when you ask the questions about neighbors and insurance and 30 different groups of people, that's all fine and dandy. We are on the criminal side of this. The civil side is for the insurance company and those lawyers that deal with, you know, the property damage that it had.
Anybody know if they filed yet?
I don't. The family has asked their pastor of the church, which is right down the street, to be their spokesperson, and he has graciously done that.
I just wondered if anybody.
No,
thank you.
We don't. Yes, sir.
Do we know of any homeowners that have filed any insurance or reports of damage to their house due to this?
We're not sure. We know there were businesses damaged.
Yeah.
There were some businesses that told us they had 30 holes in their ceiling from these rockets that were coming down on top of them. So obviously they're going to have their insurance carrier out there, and probably more than one insurance carrier.
but nothing that we know of as far as homeowners.
That's correct, we don't.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming. This is something that's been very important to us, and I, again, thank our chiefs, all the staff, and now it's in your hands.
Thank you.